Hello, I'm Sister Vasa, and welcome back to the Huffington Orthodox-Catholic Conversations. I've been invited by Huffington Ecumenical Institute at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles to host a series of online conversations between prominent Orthodox and Roman Catholic theologians, discussing in a frank and reflective manner both obstacles to and new opportunities to unity between the Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. In this second video of the series, the topic of the conversation will be young adults and church. And our two distinguished guests today are, from the Catholic side, none other than Christian Smith, renowned professor of sociology at the University of Notre Dame, award-winning author, and very well known for his research focused on religion, adolescence, and emerging adults, and social theory. Professor Smith, currently the William R. Kennan Jr. Professor of Sociology, as I've said, at the University of Notre Dame, received his MA and PhD from Harvard University in 1990 and his BA from Gordon College in 1983. Before his move to Notre Dame, he was a professor of sociology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for 12 years. Professor Smith is a very prolific author. I will just name several of his publications relevant to the topic of this video. He is author of Young Catholic America, Emerging Adults in, Out of, and Gone from the Church. In 2011, he authored Lost in Transition, The Dark Side of Emerging Adulthood. And to mention some of his award-winning books, published in 2009, co-authored with Patricia Snell, Souls in Transition, The Religious and Spiritual Lives of Young Adults. This book was the winner of the Lilly Fellows Book Award in 2010-2011, and in 2010, it won the Christianity Today Distinguished Book Award in the Christianity and Culture category. And last but not least, I will mention Professor Smith's book, co-authored with Melinda Lundquist Denton, Soul Searching, The Religious and Spiritual Lives of American Teenagers. This book was the winner of Christianity Today's 2005 Distinguished Book Award in the Christianity and Culture category. That's all I'll say for now about Professor Smith, whom we are indeed so honored to have with us discussing this topic about which he is so knowledgeable. And from the Orthodox side, we have with us today the Very Reverend Archimandrite and Dr. Anton Vrame. Currently, Father Vrame is director of Holy Cross Orthodox Press for Hellenic College, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology. He's also an adjunct associate professor at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in the area of religious education. Father Anton, or Father Tony, as he is known, for almost 15 years was director of the Department of Religious Education of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. And he is well known for his theoretical and theological work in religious education, developing resources for parish education programs, as well as for his writings in the field. He was director of the Patriarch Athenagoras Orthodox Institute at the Graduate Theological Union, where he was also a faculty member. Father Tony has been a member of the Faith and Order Commission of the National Council of Churches for many years, and he was also the chair of the commission and served on the governing board of the National Council of Churches. He is a native of Chicago, received his BA from DePaul University, his MA from the University of Chicago, his MDiv from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Boston, and he received his doctorate in religion and education from Boston College. Father Tony is a priest of the Greek Orthodox Church of America, of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, with the rank of Archimandrite, and currently he serves the Nativity Assumption of the Virgin Mary Parish in Cohasset, Massachusetts. And now, without further ado, let's welcome both our guests, Professor Christian Smith and Father Anton Vrame, and let's have a conversation about the challenging issues of young adults and church. Professor Smith and Father Tony, welcome, and welcome to all our viewers at home. Would either or both of you like to say hello to our viewers before we begin?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and hi, Sister Vasa.
Professor Smith, are you in Indiana, as we presume?
I'm in South Bend, Indiana, University
And
of Notre Dame campus.
all right, well, it's lovely to greet you from across the ocean. And Father Tony, where do you find yourself?
Hi, Sister Vasa. It's good to see you and good to meet you, Professor Smith. I am in my office in Brookline, Massachusetts, overlooking the city of Boston.
Oh, beautiful. So Brookline, Massachusetts, hometown of Conan O'Brien, I believe.
That is true.
Yes,
That
yes.
is true.
All right. So, with no further ado or irrelevant comments from Vienna, Austria, we will begin. Professor Smith, my first question is to you. Back in the early 2000s, you famously interviewed hundreds of then teenagers from 45 states in the US and of various religious backgrounds, Catholic, mainline and conservative Protestant, as I've noted here, Mormon, Jewish, Hindu. I don't believe you interviewed Orthodox Christians, but you interviewed, fascinatingly, all of these American teens that are now millennials, as far as I understand. And you came to the conclusion, as you interviewed them about their religious identity, beliefs, and practices, that they believed in a religion. All of these teens of various religions and religious affiliations, you described what they believed in as moralistic therapeutic deism. I'm going to summarize that for the viewers at home who might not know just quickly, so you can share with us other less obvious conclusions of yours. You said that this religion was moralistic in the sense that these teens believed that they must be good moral people, meaning that one must not hurt oneself or others, doing one's best to be successful and healthy. And you characterize their religion as therapeutic in the sense that they saw happiness as the main goal in life, along with feeling good about oneself. And you understood that they saw religion as therapeutic in that it could be instrumental in providing that good feeling about oneself and happiness. Finally, you characterize their religion as deism, not in the traditional sense, but in the sense that God is understood to be involved in our lives only when he is needed to resolve one's problems, to remove or fix one's bad feelings. The teens you interviewed also tended to consider traditional religion to be a good thing in general, regardless of the content of the belief itself, and the specifics of different faiths were not a thing that one should argue about, to each his own. Finally, I'm getting to my question, Professor. My question to you is, to start off our discussion, is, has moralistic therapeutic deism worked, specifically for cradle Roman Catholic millennials, in ways that traditional church belonging did or did not for the happiness or success of that particular age group?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say, first of all, that moralistic therapeutic deism, or MTD for short, is a very functional religion for young people who live in a pluralistic society where they've been taught, no, you need to get along with everybody, you shouldn't offend anybody. It's a way to hold on to some part of religion and still believe in God without being without being particularistic about it or disruptive or maybe offend other people. So in some ways it helps young people succeed in school, on the sports team, at work, etc. I think that it helps many young people to adjust to difficulties in life, to cope with their lives, to get over stress. I think it actually helps them for a while. The interesting thing is, when we interviewed the same teenagers 5 and 10 years later, they had a more complex view of things. They were still mostly moralistic therapeutic deists. About 1 in 10 had become declared atheists or anti-religious, but for most, they were still moralistic therapeutic deists, but their life had sort of hit them up enough that they realize things are a little more complicated. Things don't always work out. I'm not always going to feel okay. So life has a way of kind of roughing MTD up a bit. I would say, so on the MTD side, I would say it does help people cope. It helps people deal with their lives. Does it do so better than traditional what the church teaches would have done? I mean, in some ways, there's not much comparison because we didn't really interview that many teenagers who had sort of followed the traditional, historically Orthodox church teachings about how to live. There are some that move more in that direction, and I think they do pretty well in life too. So, but really, we don't have a great comparison. There are some young people that begin as MTD as teenagers, and then when they get in their 20s, usually some of them get more serious about their Catholic faith. I'm talking about Catholics here, and become more Orthodox and adhere more to what church teachings. But different things seem to work, so to speak, for different people. So again, it's functional. Whether or not it's really going to help people in the long run is an open question.
Thank you for those thoughts, Professor Smith. My question more specifically is, in what ways is moralistic therapeutic deism less serious, as I just heard you say? You said some of them get more serious. So I'm understanding that, to your mind, moralistic therapeutic deism, I forgot the acronym, but I can do this, MTD, is less serious. So in what ways would Orthodox Roman Catholicism be more serious? I understand that by Orthodox you mean Roman Catholic.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
To confuse
small O, yes. Well, moralistic therapeutic deism is very minimalistic. It puts authority in the hands of the individual. It doesn't make too many demands of them. It doesn't really have any strong authority. The individual is the authority. It doesn't require that one engage in many practices. It doesn't assume that one needs to be formed into something different through sacraments or anything like that, or discipleship. It's and it doesn't require that people meet in community necessarily, or gather for worship, or oriented fundamentally toward honoring God, or figure out what it means to be Trinitarian and not just theistic. So in all those ways, I would say it's easier, it's less demanding, it doesn't ask much of people, and it promises to give them a lot more in return. That's what I mean by that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for also pinpointing this individualistic side. Would it be correct to understand that the individual would be in the center, or the individual is the one who ultimately is being served?
Yeah, each individual in moralistic therapeutic deism is the center of their universe, and it sort of mirrors political liberalism or an individualistic version of political liberalism in that sense. And again, God is certainly not the center, because God is more like a cosmic therapist or a divine butler, as I write, sort of stays out of the way, doesn't make too many demands. But if you need God, you can call upon God to sort of come onto the stage and take care of some things for you. So the individual self is the center and the authority, correct?
So we're the ones who call upon God. He's not the one who calls us first.
Correct.
It's his job to respond to us, not ours to respond to him.
Yeah, God is a nice guy who also wants us to be happy and to be nice to other people. And so God will sort of be out there, staying up in the staying sort of out of the way until God is needed. Another image that one teenager I interviewed said is God is like a stage producer. He stays up in the balcony and watches everything that's happening, pretty much stays out of the preparations of all the production, unless there's something God really wants to sort of, a problem that he sees, then he'll come down and work it out and then go back away.
Okay, thank you very much. And church authority is not really in this picture.
No, church authority, churches are sort of nice resources of various pieces of tradition and teaching, which the individual as the authority can pick and choose, draw upon whatever they are willing to or capable of believing, and whatever they find helpful. But if there's something in the church teaching, they're certainly not taken as a whole, and there's certainly no strong authority in it. If there's something in the church teaching a teenager or any American doesn't like, they can just not worry about it. They can just disregard it.
Right. Father Tony, from your experience in the Orthodox Christian realm and religious education, as far as the Greek Orthodox Church in the United States goes, would you find that moralistic therapeutic deism is also a religion to which our young people subscribe, or perhaps not so young people?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, they come to us through their parents and their families with these vague notions about God and what God is supposed to do in their lives, even if they've been grown up in the church. It's through their families. So yeah, I mean, they do come to that, and what they don't have, generally speaking, and I think part of it is the developmental challenge of just growing up of an identity as an Orthodox Christian. They belong to lots of little clubs in the church and things like that, but their sense of identity is still being formed as they're developing. And I know when I read Soul Searching for the first time, I was just stepping into this position that I just had, and we also find that the young people that we work with are terribly inarticulate, as Chris found out in his study of young people about their own beliefs. And so they're walking in not very well informed, not well able to articulate what they believe, whether it, basic content or things like that. So they have these very vague notions about their identity, what it's supposed to do and how it works and means. And my job then as a religious educator is to try to kind of work in that space to help them answer the questions that they bring. So
Well, when you speak, Father Tony, about, say, your job or our jobs as religious educators, you have written on, the issues of a certain shift in the receptiveness, really, of young people in our day to religious instruction in the first place. And could you speak a little bit about the changes in the attitudes towards religious instruction, how receptive or how much less receptive you find teenagers have become, and please also speak to whether or not the churches, insofar as the Greek Orthodox Church's attitude or approach to religious education has changed or not correspondingly.
Sure. The attitudes have changed dramatically. First and foremost, the competition, and it truly is competition that churches face for the time and the energy and attention of young people. That has dramatically shifted kids' receptiveness to religious instruction. Most Greek Orthodox parishes, I think most Orthodox parishes in the United States, are still operating from a Sunday school kind of approach. So you're competing with people's attention for Sunday mornings. And it takes place in a rarely compressed space of the time and place within a parish. And so the receptiveness is challenged at that level. Receptiveness then gets challenged when the quality of some of these programs by well-meaning volunteers, usually parents, gets challenging. A lot of the questions especially teenagers, bring to religion are quite challenging, and their moms and dads that are working in their parishes trying to hand on their faith sometimes are not well equipped to deal with it. They rely on sometimes, outdated resources. They rely sometimes on, bad pedagogical strategies that just that can turn kids off. And so that also then says, well, if I have to if my time is being challenged by that versus, as we like to say, sports on Sunday, sports looks like a much better deal for my attention for these young people, because there's engagement, it's fun, things like that. So
it's moral and it's therapeutic.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
you can call on God, like soccer
can,
players make the sign of the cross before they
soccer players. Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes that helps.
And hopefully it helps. And so, and it's at that level. And as I like to say, it's for the family. And this is where I think, again, Professor Smith's work with young people was so instructive about the role of families in all of this. When families are making these choices about how their kids' time is going to be used, as I like to always say, it's not church versus street gang. It's church versus something else that they see as a social benefit, the sports teams, the music programs, all these other things that kids do. And so they don't, so that's the choice that's being wrestled with at home. And families, especially when the kids can fight back as they age, they say, the sports team looks like a much better deal and a much better use of their time.
Well, I want to try to get, for both of you, to get back to how is going to church and being church providing something other than moralistic therapeutic deism? I mean, what is, rather than saying this can be more fun than your sports team, is that the promise that the church is making? Or is there something that one can find in traditional church belonging that one can't find at a sports game or as a member of a sports team or on a lonely walk in the woods or on the beach or on a family outing? Professor Smith, could you speak to that? Maybe it's a very broad question, but is there a certain, without needing to strategize, is there a return to the essence of being church and simply witnessing to that?
I think we would all agree that if somebody's looking for it, they can certainly find that. I mean, as I said, there's a treasure troves of ways of living and understanding and practices that are there, but somebody has to be looking for it or after it. And as Father Tony said, I mean, there's so many competing forces and influences that there just aren't that many young people that are looking for that at this point. And so when they go to even a really good church or parish, it's very easy for them to translate whatever's going on to fit their moralistic therapeutic deism paradigm. So they can sort of re-narrate what's going on as, this makes me feel warm, or this reminds me of something from my childhood, or it feels good to pray, or any kind of thing like that. Or even a very positive appreciation of a church, but like, this is a good place, there's a lot of good people here, my priest is a really wonderful person, but that doesn't really break through to any alternative narrative, like I mean, you name it, but what's the state of your soul, or what does God want for you in your life, or what's your vocation in this world, or how are you going to live that's going to be different? Those don't really impinge upon young people too much. And it seems that even when life gets harder in 20s and maybe 30s, there are some that return to church looking for something more, but very many seem, even if they're very anxious and disrupt their lives are having real challenges, the general, I would say, default of most people is like, well, you draw on some of your spirituality that you learned in your youth, but you look for answers on the internet, with friends, by exercising, by eating better. There are alternative ways that most young people, I think, are looking to sort of solve their lives. They're not ready to take on traditional Christianity as a way of life that's going to reshape them.
Is there a missing sort of message of the cross, of like when we say when life gets hard, right?
or things might get dark, or there are encounters with other people dying, or one's own mortality somehow. Isn't there a sort of being called by Christ specifically, not just in general the idea of God, right? But the way of the cross, the way of, follow me, take up your cross. Like, is that message by and large missing? This is, in the sense, it's not that we want you to feel bad and die, you know what I'm saying, and suffer, but there is a kind of suffering is part of the way, but it is a light burden, and this easy yoke. And there's a lightness that is always about new life on a daily basis, not just, when you die and after being miserable all your life. Is there, I was going to ask both of you this question of, if one gets to the, to the essence of specifically the Christian message, traditionally the way of the cross, not divorced from life and light, is there a benefit, or perhaps not, in our religious instruction fostering the specific Christian identity, with all the gory details, and talking about that witness? It seems like in Christianity, there's always this from Christ himself, you will be my witnesses, and in translation, that sounds easier than you will be, as it does in the Greek, because we all know that Christ spoke Greek. Father Tony can tell you that, all the Greek Orthodox. Well, he says, you will be my martyrs, and that's like, ugh, in English, right? But right. There is that there is a sacrificial element to ultimately being yourself. That exposes you. It makes you give of yourself, so perhaps, either one of you go about, is it good? Is it bad about this self-offering? Ask what you can give, not what you get, just either of you talk.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, yeah, it is a challenge. And I think what churches in our quote unquote messaging, that's, the lingua of the day, right? Don't always make a connection between life and faith, and how one brings one's life into their faith and takes their faith back into life, to use, a phrase from one of my teachers, Tom Vrame, from Boston College from so many years ago. And so when we do that, though, when we make this connection, the church can start helping young people see the implications of their religious commitment on their lives. Not by telling them what to do, because they do want to figure it out for themselves, but by helping them, I like to say, by asking the questions, allowing them the space to wrestle with those questions about what their faith could be telling them, and providing them, and then when the church provides them with an opportunity to put it into practice in some way. Young people today, it seems, at least all the studies I read, are just intent on are very much oriented around service projects, whether it's their school, their church. And so when we connect that sense of service to their Christian discipleship, and they're not just doing it for points at school, but there's a greater implication, and it's a response to the gospel, then I think we can begin to help them connect the dots. The problem is they want to figure it out for themselves, so we have to just kind of let them do that, and it's by putting this in front of them, and then our job then is to continue to nurture those questions and to be there as conversation partners for them, to say, see how this all works. But as someone who's been in leadership roles on this, and I serve a congregation, my job is to try to make that connection from the faith into the practical life application aspects of Christian discipleship.
Professor Smith?
Yeah, I would say that's all correct. And I would add that So I think there is a lot of pressure on clergy and people that are trying to come up with the right messaging, as Father Tony said, to young people and to the whole world about what the message is. There's a lot of pressure to make it appealing, to make it more attractive for obvious reasons. But if you put it in larger context, as Father Tony said earlier, churches sometimes will have an hour or two with a young person a week. And meanwhile, the rest of society and culture is giving them radically different messages than the way of the cross, namely, you're your own authority. You should do whatever you want. You're here to be made happy, and not just happy, but you should be satisfied with all kinds of products and experiences that you can buy on the market. So everything from consumerism, iPhones, like everything going on in the world is about individual self-development as it's directed by that individual, what's going to satisfy them. That's a very different paradigm than historic Christianity and the way of the cross, or you will be my martyr. So it's just very challenging to overcome. It requires a special kind of bonding of a young person to their faith for them to really move forward in that kind of direction against all of those other forces. So there are just a lot of bigger picture sociological influences at work that even if churches have their messaging right, and even if even if the parents are well trained and there's the right pedagogy, there's just so many countervailing forces at work. It's a real challenge. So I guess I would say I wouldn't want to leave it on, well, the church just isn't getting its messaging right. Even if it got it really great, there's still big challenges.
Yeah, to put it in numeric terms, something pointed out to me, most churches get 1 or 2 176ths of a young person's time. Think of a 7-day week, 176 hours, and we're trying to pack an awful lot in 1 or 2 of those hours.
Yeah, and another piece of this puzzle that complicates it is that very many of the young people that we interviewed thought about religion as something that would become maybe an important part of their life later on. But the assumption in the script is religion's an adult matter. It's for adult concerns about how do you raise your own children, and will you go to heaven, and so on. And young people think, I don't have to worry about that now. So religion is just not relevant in their minds for their life now. So even if they think, when I'm 30, I'll get married, and then I'll start to think about this, they're not thinking about it now. So, and again, that's a larger cultural script that says where you are in life now, you don't have to think about this stuff too much. You can worry about it later.
Yeah, and I would, to go on with that, I would think that, and the young people that are thinking about it are kind of, a few and far between. I think of a program we have on our campus here, Crossroad, with basically 17 and 18-year-olds coming together to explore their vocation, think about how God is speaking in their lives and what they're going to do with it. And the program has had great success over the about 20 years of its existence, but it's still a relatively small cohort of young people who just impress you with these questions. But you put it in the grand scheme of things, it's still just kind of a drop in the bucket.
Right. So Father Tony, is there an effort on the part of your church authorities where you are to recognize, sometimes to read the signs of the times somehow? Is there a different space, say the internet, where the church is also to be present, like not just those 1 or 2 hours when they are the few of them that do come, not only in the COVID era. Anyway, so speak to that.
Yeah, COVID aside, and the shift to the technological stuff that churches have been doing the last couple of years. Yeah, I mean, at least the Orthodox Church here in the United States, there's been a real, almost every meeting I go to would say, what about our youth in some way, shape, or form? What are we going to do? How are we going to do that? And so how are we going to reach out to them? And retain them if they're, still there, and then try to figure out how do we attract them if they're at the margins or, on their way out. And so, yeah, we've here at least in the United States, I mean, I mentioned Crossroad here on our campus, an academic kind of summer camp that's been around for close to 20 years. Summer camps across our archdiocese. I think every diocese here has a camping program that gets young people together to live in this community where they can find that space and talk about things. Obviously, parishes still have Sunday school and youth ministry work, things like that. Then in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a real attempt to jump into social media, whether it's YouTube, everything from Twitter and Instagram and all those kinds of ways to get a message out that appeal to young people. In my old position in religious education for 35 years, we had an oratorical program where kids were writing speeches and talking about their faith, and they were getting prizes if they did well. Where they can write poems and take photographs and do artistic expressions of their faith to try to appeal to the questions that they have and allow them to study their faith a bit, to explore it a bit, and then to articulate something about it. And so again, there's this continual push on the part of the church to try to reach out to do this kind of work. And how do you measure it? You measure it. We certainly try to figure out in terms of retention. And again, nobody's really doing that type of work to measure retention. But I look at it from just the pure, how many young people are participating. And, certain things are very, very successful, certain things less. And, it's a continual struggle of churches. And this is where I think a difference between, because I know this is for the Huffington Institute, where Orthodox and Catholic churches have some strengths and weaknesses to them. The Roman Catholic Church, with its program of confirmation in particular, is a powerful moment to grab a young person's attention that is missing in Orthodox liturgical practice of a teenage rite of passage called confirmation. And we're operating from a more nurturing someone throughout their life journey approach. And
for the folks at home who might not know, the Orthodox connect that the sacrament of confirmation or chrismation is attached to immediately after baptism. So usually in infant baptism, if usually whatever, in the case of infants being baptized, that all happens there. And a lot of times we don't see these folks ever again, and they might not even have the baby go to Holy Communion, which is supposed to happen if there's no, Eucharist celebrated right after the baptism. Yeah. So Father Tony is indicating, my friends at home, that in the Roman Catholic tradition, they came to the practice of delaying the First Communion, and it's a complicated history, but confirmation, so that, there's this required catechism that happens before confirmation. Anyway, so this is also pastorally understandable to keep, at least until that moment, the kids in church. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm just catching from, those of anybody who's worked with my experience, and sorry, I'm dominating at the moment, the experience that I've heard from my friends who teach, especially in Roman Catholic universities, when they ask that intro to theology course that many of them have, they say, what are the significant experiences? And so many, especially Roman Catholic kids, but even many Protestant traditions that have confirmation, point to that moment when they have to wrestle with these questions. And as Orthodox, it becomes a challenge for us. I say we jump through lots of hoops to kind of mimic confirmation programs without calling it that.
Professor Smith, could you speak perhaps to what you've mentioned as this notion that religion, I think maybe it's true that religion in one's life does take on at least a different significance as one gets older. Is it Could you speak to perhaps, if you see that as true, a different significance to religion, perhaps to our faith becoming more deeply, sort of articulatable or understandable to us as one gets older? Does this have anything to do with going through suffering in life, or just, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So
Yeah.
to
So
what extent is that true?
historically in the US, there was a pretty strong association between sort of growing up, getting older, and especially getting married and having children, and sort of returning to the religion that one was raised in. There's a close bond between family formation and going to church historically. So you would see a rise in sort of people going away in their late teens and 20s and then returning later on. What we now see, however, is that that was true of everyone up to the Gen X generation. It was true of boomers and everyone older, but the data clearly show that that has stopped being the case. Gen Xers were the turning point. Millennials are clearly, the older they've gotten, they haven't been returning to church as a group. And that's true of Gen Z, like young people now, what is what we should expect. So not only are they less religious, but the curve doesn't go up as they age. And we can think through a lot of reasons why that's the case. But that's what's going on out there in terms of all the evidence that we have. I also, from our data, we showed that the probability, even among young people, millennials, the probability of returning to church, I mean, some people clearly do, but the probability of returning to church is more likely among Protestants. Catholic, Roman Catholic youth tend to drop out and stay out. So there are differences across traditions that way as well. But again, a lot of this we have to be sociological about. Young people are not getting married as early or ever as they used to be. Cohabitation is much more prevalent and acceptable. People are marrying others who are increasingly not part of their faith background, so that may actually create a conflict for them to pursue. Childbearing is being postponed, and sometimes voluntary childlessness. So all of those demographic factors lead to a removal of the kind of processes that used to bring young adults back into church. I would also say, just as a tag to what Father Tony said about Roman Catholic confirmation, it's interesting to hear that from within a Roman Catholic point of view, there are troubles getting teenagers to go through this, and there are two of the difficulties to think of. One of them, it works for some people, it's successful in some cases, but when teenagers aren't really interested in this, the parents can easily get into a negotiation mode of sort of like, just get this over with, just for me, even if you don't, just do it for me. And then the whole thing takes on the feel of a graduation, which is, okay, I got to graduate high school, I got to do college, but when it's over, like, that's it. So even if you can get a young person to go to catechism for a year in order to get, to finish it, to tick all the boxes off in their mind, if you set it up as a graduation, you're certainly not like framing things. It's not the launch of an ongoing life. It's a finish out your last obligations, and then you're free to do what you want.
Yeah,
Right.
one of the influences on me in my work as a religious educator was, even in Orthodox parishes, the way we treat religious education without confirmation as a practice is we have developed a graduation mentality. Once one finishes Sunday school at 8th grade or high school, whatever that parish does, it's all over. You're done. You don't have to know anything else. You don't have to learn anything else. You're good. And so whatever Christian identity has been formed by the time someone is 12 or 17 you're almost, that's where that kind of ends. And the church hasn't moved, it hasn't devoted enough resources or energy into helping kind of nurture that, push that along. When I was in California, we did a lot of work with young people at University of California in Berkeley. And campus ministry became really so important because all of a sudden they were coming to us with these questions. Again, it's kids who are already interested, you know, in these questions. Lord knows how many more Orthodox Christian kids were going to the University of California, Berkeley when I was there. But still, the questions, you could see these interested kids still wrestling with these questions of faith. And the point, they dovetail off of what Professor Smith just said, it was kids who were already engaged in church that just wanted to further it. If the young person wasn't engaged, they might come in because we had a good food, and there was something special going on. But we didn't see that young person very often at all. It was kids who were already engaged.
Another point I think it's important to put in here to contextualize all this is the importance of parents. I've spent the last number of years studying parents, and basically parents set a kind of a glass ceiling for how invested and committed with their faith their children will be. I think we can imagine in the early 20th century, faith formation was much more of a communal project. It was related to ethnicity and neighborhood and so on. Well, that's all been disintegrated basically with the suburbs and just all kinds of forces. So now I think religion has gone from being what I call, used to be a community solidarity project to now kind of a individual identity accessory. You can take it on or you cannot take it on. It's sort of many things you might be part of who you are and your identity. So parents, so that takes power away from the community, from the group, the people, so to speak, and puts a huge burden of responsibility on individual parents. And parents will model or not model. They will have conversations with their children as they grow up, or they won't. And very, very few young people are going to be more religious, more invested, more involved than their parents are. And the vast majority will be somewhat or a lot less.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, aren't the parents just older young people, right? And sometimes it seems in a lot of our parishes, we do have youth programs, and then we pretend like the parents have already graduated, so they don't need to be, talked to. Or, I sometimes think there's a little bit of too much of our voice, and the voice of Christ and God calling people seems to be obscured, maybe, by this big presence of either, what we're presenting as the message somehow.
Yeah. The adults I see, I mean, again, I serve a congregation. I travel around the country in other congregations. The adults in our parishes are also the products of these programs and the system that we have, where they too are pretty inarticulate about their religious traditions and their knowledge. So my job as a pastor then also becomes to try to remind them of these things continually. So that's a very big piece of what I do. But also when I step back from it, I also try again to think of what is the religious knowledge that someone needs or should have even as an adult. The metaphor I've always used in my teaching here at the seminary was, how much, because I like sports, how much knowledge does one need to have to be a good fan of Notre Dame football, right? You don't need to, do you need to know the pass completion ratio of the current quarterback, who I don't pay attention to football, but you need to know the pass completion ratio of a particular quarterback to be a particularly good fan of a football team? Or do you really just need to have, there's a step below that, or what are the steps below that one needs to have to be attracted, caught up, participatory, and things like that? So I can look at the face, and I'll use the sport I like. I can look at the face of the baseball card and know who that is, but I may know almost nothing about what's on the backside of it, his batting average throughout his entire career. but yet I'm still a pretty good fan of that team. So, it's that kind of process at work that we have to wrestle with, knowing that we have these people coming to our churches. They are inarticulate. They don't remember. They weren't paying attention that day. All those kinds of things. But then we also have to step back and say, what does one really need to know to be living this out in one's religious faith? And again, as an educator, I think, at least in the pluralistic culture of the United States, you need to know a reasonable amount so that you can tell somebody who you are and what that is in a credible way. That's how I've always approached it.
Yeah, it's hard to appreciate football if you don't know what a first down is and a whole bunch of other things. You don't have to be an expert, but you got to know some of the basics of what the game is about, and then it starts to take on like a real interest for you. Yeah, that's a really good metaphor, I think.
Thank you. It's worked for me for a long time. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to know the game. You have to know the basics. You have to know what to do. I mean, again, I live in Boston. You have to know what song to sing when you're at Fenway Park. And if you don't know the words to Sweet Caroline, when they pull that out, I mean, at Fenway Park, you're not participating in the game, right? But who the latest shortstop is for the for the Red Sox, and what his batting average is, and all those kinds of on-base percentages, is that critical? No, you can still enjoy the game and participate in it.
Right, and if you're convinced a priori that actually the boring details there aren't even important, because you've become convinced. Now, if I'll return to the whole church phenomenon, if you're convinced that the gory details there are actually not important, it's good, it serves a good purpose, as Professor Smith has written so eloquently. It's in general, young people think that it's a good thing. It's one instrumentalizes it as something that helps you to feel good. But as far as that goes, you don't want to, because the different religions do differ, and we don't want to argue about that. That's not really appropriate. It's not somehow PC. If you're a priori convinced that the rules of the game for every team, or the way it works, might not be important, then maybe you're less inclined to dive in and learn about those rules. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you think there's nothing to learn, I've had this experience, even talking to others. I happen to be in the liturgiological field, and I've spoken to others who have gone the path of academically, studying, say, Byzantine liturgy, like my friend Father Stefanos Alexopoulos, or somebody like Father Alex Rantel. Sorry if some of you don't know these names. In any event, they said that when they, as having grown up, as even being children of priests, when they discovered that there's actually so much to learn about what seemed like there's nothing really to know about. They do the same thing at church all the time, but if you start learning about liturgy, you find out that there are volumes written on all of the how interesting and what a cultural development stands behind what we do today as liturgy, whether it's in the Roman rite, or in, say, the Byzantine rite, or in many other ancient Christian rites. Anyway, I want to say, getting back to what Professor Smith has indicated as kind of, I think maybe, this if you could speak, Professor Smith, more to this kind of not getting into the contents of the faith, and what that brings us to, because if we're not finding the contents like important or interesting, then we're not delving into it, we're not receptive to learning it, right? But that brings us to having a very superficial and finally sort of big yawn reaction to that whole business.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say what I heard Father Tony say was not that there isn't a lot more to learn, but that in order for this to make any sense, there's a minimal amount that everyone needs to learn, or else you just don't
Right.
get what's going on. So I would say that's true. There's a minimal amount, and then people can go from there as they need to, but you don't want to scare people off like, well, until you get a doctorate in, Byzantine liturgy, you're not. So that's one clarification. The other thing is, I think a big piece of this is young people have not been taught how to have a particular commitment, a serious investment in a particular way of doing Christianity, say, without that having to lead to conflict and violence. So young people today have grown up in a world where there's a lot of wars that are allegedly about religion, and terrorism that's driven by religion. That's a totally different era than the Cold War, when the righteous people stood on God's side and it was the atheist communists that had to be defeated. Now religion is associated with violence, and as the societies become more pluralistic and young people are taught, don't make trouble at school, everywhere, fit in, be smooth, don't make trouble, don't create problems. I think what they hear, what that translates into is, it's okay to say you believe in God, but don't use the J word, for example. Don't say Jesus, because Jesus could be disruptive, it could be upsetting, it could be a trigger for somebody. And so there are these pressures to sort of departicularize the faith. That's what leads to moralistic therapeutic deism, I think. Now, from my point of view, we'd have a much better world if everybody in their particularities could own those and be their distinctive selves, but still know how to get along with people who are different from them and not back away from their particular beliefs, but that doesn't have to turn into a fight. So, I mean, clearly this is a larger problem we as a society have in politics and culture in lots of ways, but as that reflects on religion, if young people could learn, oh, I could actually say I believe not just in God, but in the Trinity or Jesus and the Holy Spirit, without having to offend someone, or learning how to be respectful of others in a truly pluralistic world instead of a uniformized world of minimal difference. I think that would help things go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. I think of what you wrote, Professor Smith, about whateverism, right, in young people. Whatever, that kind of whatever approach that young people have to a lot of this. That's what that was very striking to me, and you see that so often because of what you've described. And I do think that once young people are, when you start raising some of these religious claims that we all make and have, our beliefs, differences, in a matter of fact, but basically non-threatening, we're right, you're wrong kind of approach, people I think they can become interested in some of these things. Then they go, oh, I get it. A simple example, the Orthodox Church has finished Christmas and Epiphany, and when you point out, you remind everybody that in the East, Epiphany, a theophany as we call it, is about the baptism of Christ. In the West, it's the visit of the Magi. And that creates different customs, different foci, and things like that. And people go, oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. And so and again, it's not, we're right, you're wrong. And, you can be, the phrase I use again, loyal to one's tradition, but open to the claims of others and their experiences. And I think that's really where I think all of us should be kind of aiming for.
Oh, right. Because there's sort of a fear that it could lead to violence. I was wondering if people, who do fill the hole somehow, having left a certain, religion or, tradition, I was wondering if, inevitably one doesn't somehow, at least in some ways, fill that hole and find either a self-help program when certain, that spiritual hole, not everybody admittedly has, but when it starts to create certain disbalance, or, it leads to addictions, and looking for maybe a guru, for somebody to guide one out of there. And whether or not, you know, because getting back to my very first question to Professor Smith, has a generation or those who have left, have they found happiness and success? Or maybe, you know, there are some of the same pitfalls, and there's a certain violence to the self-help culture where we have, you know, we have a different way of dealing with hardship, suffering, difficulty. And there seems to be a message of, you know, you can better yourself. You can find happiness through being successful and healthy. But you know what? If you're not fixed, if you haven't found the self-help or the vitamin supplement or the weight loss or the fitness program, you know, you're a loser, because you can fix it today, and you should. And there's incredible pressure to fix everything. Whereas the way of the cross, I think there's a certain relief of you know, of some things, you know, some of the tears stay with the wheat and so forth. And there is a patient bearing of the cross. Anyway, I'm throwing that out there, that the alternative to that old clunky thing that is church being, you know, that's so old. Are there specific aspects to, you know, not having it or having it that anybody out there listening to this, Professor Smith, might think about? Like, is there, you know, is there something to be said also from the sociologist's point of view for doing the church thing?
Yeah. Yeah, so good observations and good question. I mean, part of what you're saying, part of what I hear you saying that I think is true is that increasingly there have become available a number of substitutes for what churches used to have something like a monopoly on: mystery, transcendent experiences, teachings to follow. So it may be Oprah is now your pastor. You don't think of that as spiritual or religious, not Oprah anymore, but you know, in past decades, or transcendent experiences by going and singing Sweet Caroline at the Red Sox,
No, I
or
think of
going.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there are lots of ways that people seek what it used to be thought of as, well, this is what religion has to offer. Now you can get that through various kinds of quasi-spiritualities and other experiences. And I don't have confidence that human beings are sort of analytical and rational enough that they could say, I mean, or let me back up and say this. I don't think a lot of that stuff is satisfying. We know that going shopping makes people happy for a half an hour, and then it's no longer, you know, so it's a kind of addiction itself. You can go have a transcendent experience at a rock concert, but then it's over. You can get a high from various substances, and then you have a hangover. So I don't think that the world particularly makes people all that happy, but there's a general sense of, well, you just keep going, you just stick with it. Life goes on, you try something new, you look for a new show that interests you, whatever it is. So back to my earlier statement, I think there are relatively few young adults, let's say, who are rational and analytical enough to say, wait a minute, I've been trying X, Y, and Z for 15 years and I'm no more happy than I was at the start. Maybe I should look for something different. I think there are such powerful messages in the world and in advertising and in whole ways of life of our culture that just keep people going in the old way. There is we have to acknowledge there is a subset, there's a small minority of young people who do decide, you know what, maybe I should consider becoming, joining a religious order, or I actually really do like smells and bells, or however you want to put it. There's always a small minority who will head back in a quote unquote traditional ecclesial direction. But for the most part, I think people are driven to just keep going with the dominant way of life and culture.
Yeah, there are a couple of things on that. I only learned about this the other day. The work it was a publication called How We Gather, on a couple of people out of Harvard, and they talked about how people seem to be attracted to organizations outside of religion that provide community, ritual, messages of personal transformation, touching the world and of other themes in them. And they point to things that are overtly not religious, like CrossFit, as one of these places that does that, but also kind of these religious but non-churchy kinds of organizations that are like dinner meetings where people who have lost a loved one get together and can talk about it and pray together and share the community of that of that experience. An ancestor would be like AA, but much less about alcohol, but about other things. And so you have that. We've seen this move amongst some young people, kind of this connection to ritual, but also this kind of moving away from the rational in some ways. People looking there's a movement out there we're seeing what people call re-enchantment. To find this mystical experiences and things like that the world would certainly have discarded over the last 100 years or so. So we're seeing lots of different things happening, and I think what's so interesting is that church itself provides ritual, community, birth transformation, touching the world, and it's an opportunity for the church to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then to recognize that how do the practices and the life of the church become real for people to say, not only this is what we do, we have done these for 1,000 or 2,000 years. They work, they provide these experiences for people, and we have a body of literature and experience that says that we can present to you, we can do this is part of your experience. And so the idea of the community development model, is very much, that we talked about earlier, is very much at the heart of this.
Yeah, I would say Mother Tony's totally right. It's an amazing paradox. So many people are searching for something that the church has offered. It's been like its specialization, so to speak, in offering for a very long time. But people are not looking for it in churches for the most part. And I think that's a puzzle. I think there are two pieces that help to explain. One is, in the US at least, we have seen a long-term decline over many decades in trust in institutions, not just religious institutions, every institution. Congress is at the very bottom of that. The military gets more trust, but in general, Americans, because of things like Watergate and everything from then on, we learned, well, institutions, you just can't trust them that much. And so church, anything that's institutional is suspect right off the ground. So if it's an informal thing or if it's a club, that's better. It's not like a real institution you have to work at distrust. The second thing has to do with authority and people's notions of authority. People are happy to be part of community and re-enchantment and so on, but most people much prefer that in a context where they retain authority. There's nothing making an overarching claim on them. They can move in, they can move out, they can plug in, they can plug out. The world is much more porous that way, and any authority that says, look, we're telling you what the truth is here. This is really reality, and here's a way of life that you need to live. And we claim some authority as teaching authority, and tradition and history and all of that. That just really frightens people. Most Americans now, especially young people, want to retain control over their own lives and view churches and church traditions as too much of a threatening authority. So they would rather piece it together themselves for whatever will work for them.
Yeah, a challenging moment I had, I spoke at a high school teaching tolerance religious thing here in my area. And with that, the subject of kind of religion as kind of all about rules came up. And in my reaction, I said, yeah, there are rules in religion, but there are rules in sports. There are rules in all kinds of aspects of life. And so this is just kind of this is how we organize ourselves, how we live. You can't, just stick stick with the sports metaphors, when I hit the baseball, I can't run to third base. I have to run to first. That's the rule, right? I mean,
That's what makes it fun, is that you're playing within a set of rules.
yeah, you're playing it within a sense of rules, and there are people that do it better than others and know those rules and all, those kinds of things. And so I think when people say, well, religion's all about rules, I think it's a kind of it's the false equivalent argument that people want to make, because I think it goes back to what Professor Smith is saying, that the rules that religion puts out there do talk about the way someone might live their life, and that impinges on their sense of their autonomy about that.
Right, until maybe whatever happens, when they go down a certain path. I'm not saying that this happens by far with everyone, but sometimes, their life becomes unmanageable. And, that's been a thing. I'm not sure we ever had another era where addiction was the big thing that brought people back to just the inevitability of having a higher power of some form. And it brings a lot of people back to the tradition of their childhood. Anyway, thank you so much to both of you and for your wonderful work. And Professor Smith, your work has been a very important discovery for me, only leading up to this interview. And thank you for that. I've known Father Tony for many years now and appreciate his work as well. We only, touched upon the surface of all of this. However, I think everybody will appreciate you having shared your time here and your wealth of knowledge and experience of all of this. So any final words to our viewers? Professor Smith, perhaps you go, and then we'll have Father Tony give us his final blessings. Professor Smith?
Well, I guess I'll just say you're welcome, and thank you for hosting this conversation. It's really great to be talking across some major traditions, people that have common concerns, and it's a pleasure to meet you both on Zoom.
I'm very honored. Father Tony?
Yeah, I too, Sister Voss, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I'll be really just kind of effusive here and say there's an opportunity for me to meet somebody. Your book is right here, and I've got the others, and so I've really appreciated the work that you've brought into this and raised these things for us. And again, working across our religious lines to keep these conversations going. And to the person who's watching online later on, at some point, these questions are important. We've been wrestling with them for a long time. Each generation of us is figuring this out in dialogue with our religious resources, the work of the social sciences and theology in particular, but also our own personal experiences with these things to discern our way forward.
So on that note, we'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you very much to the viewers at home for joining us. And thank you to the Huffington Ecumenical Institute for sponsoring this wonderful Orthodox Catholic conversation. Tune in for the next one, everybody, and bye for now.